Thank you to Wendy and Bridges Not Borders for having me. I am absolutely thrilled to be here because I already feel like I love you guys already, because I know the work that you've done pre-COVID. Many of you have said it. Well, business has slowed down a bit on your side, a little, since the border closure. Um, so my talk today, I do have a few slides just because I think sometimes it's good to have a visual. So Grace has allowed me to share my screen. So I'm going to share my screen, and you're welcome to spotlight me if you want.
I've done that already, Diane.
Okay. All right. So my talk is on um, kind of immigrants, asylum seekers in the North Country. And this is our local grocery store, Hannaford. Some of you have been here. Plattsburgh's not that far. And this is a brother and sister. They're like 19 and 20 years old. They came with their parents from Colombia, and they came on a Friday. And uh, luckily, we the children spoke enough English, so we were able to get groceries to hold them over until we made a plan. So that's introducing two young people that we got to see uh, recently. Just North Country context, and you all know this very, very well. We are such a rural area. Overall, economically depressed. Plattsburgh is a small city. The city itself is under 20,000, and mostly farm country. We have very small immigrant populations, and we don't have a lot of data. As a matter of fact, this nice graph that my friend Kim LaRoe did is because the Canadian government, Wendy, and others provide the data with direct backs. Um, Really, we have a lack of immigrant serving organizations. Plattsburgh Cares sprung up in the spring of 2017 just because our New York State Attorney General had to sue local taxi companies because they were gouging these vulnerable travelers, hundreds and hundreds of dollars to give them a ride from Plattsburgh to the border. Um, we didn't have much infrastructure. We have a very significant lack of awareness in the community. Unless you're a hotel operator or a taxi driver, you may not understand all the people that have come through our area or that live in our area. And again, just by stats, the North Country has a very minuscule, less than 5% of our total population are immigrants, and the statewide average is 22%. And very quickly, when we talk about Plattsburgh Cares help, um, we have three basic categories of folks, and I'm briefly going to talk about farm workers and longtime stayers, but the most of it is going to be on the short-term passerbys, the passers. Just so you know, obviously we have a lot of apple orchards and dairy farms in our area, and we have had a hard time getting a foot in the door with these farm workers. There's a lot of, um, again, people don't want to talk about it. Sometimes there's language barriers. Um, they are afraid of being targeted by ICE. Some of them may have come over on an agricultural visa, but dairy farm is 365 days a year and they're out of status. There's a lot of unknowns, and farm workers in our region, it's a very sensitive and precarious situation. There are some hopeful things going on. We are trying to do some know your rights, and unfortunately, there's rare pathways to status. Lately, we've had some calls for green light advocacy, meaning helping farm workers get their driver's permit and their licenses. And just so you know, we do have people from all over the world in the North Country, and our local citizenry is shocked when they see this list. They don't even realize. People are kind of in their own bubbles and may not realize this. And most of the folks that are stayers, if you will, their key need is immigration legal services. So again, we try to hook people up to free consultations. These folks need a lot of integration into the community, and some of you are doing that, that the families that you're working with, because it's getting their children involved in school and getting them health insurance and to appointments. And oh my goodness, there are so many, so much work to be done for people that are staying in your community, finding housing, getting furniture, all those things, trying to get some helpers to befriend and integrate them into the community. The third category that Plattsburgh Cares sees are what we call right now short-term passers. And I love this little block diagram because, sometimes there's successful border crossings, and that's wonderful. Before COVID, there was over 50,000 probably at Roxham Road, and we all know that. We'll show you a few numbers in a minute. Um, and then some at the regular crossing. However, there's unsuccessful attempts, and that's when individuals sometimes are detained by our U.S. authorities, and initially in the Clinton County Jail, and then we've seen them occasionally be transferred to federal detention in Batavia, which is in Buffalo area. And then some are returned, if you will, to the US side and released. They're free to go. They've done their checks, even if they're undocumented, they didn't enter unlawfully, but if there's no criminal record, they can say, okay, you're free to leave, or make sure you get your next immigration date. You're there for that. But they're stranded if they if they don't have a plan B. And this is where Plattsburgh Cares steps in. And oh my gosh, their plan A was to be able to cross into Canada, which many, as you know, have been on the other side waiting for them to assist when they cross over. We know this is the 2017, 18, and 19 numbers. The 2020 numbers haven't come out yet, but that August of 2017, when in 1 month, August, we had over 5,000 people come through Plattsburgh and go up to the Roxham Road to cross. So this this is usually a rapid response, urgent response, especially if we have to go get them at the border. Do we have car seats? Are they freezing? Many come and they're not equipped for our weather in the cold weather months. Um, we try to some of the first questions is, what's their fluency, getting interpretation services if we need that, and building trust enough to eventually get in a conversation. Do they have any contacts in the US that we can help them get to? That's really kind of our first um, line of offense, if you will, is, let us help you get somewhere. Uh, you know that Plattsburgh is very small and rural. We don't have a shelter. We don't have a family shelter. The nearest, shelter that can accept folks that are looking for asylum, either in U.S. or Canada, is in Buffalo or Detroit, Michigan. So we look to them if they have room for these individuals or families. But we, in the meantime, try to hook them up with an initial legal consult. We get them bus and train tickets. And since COVID, with no Amtrak, because they don't go up to Montreal, no Greyhound. We have to get them to Albany to even catch a bus or a train. So that has been, for the last 14 months, a huge concern. And it's not like volunteers can do it. Nobody felt safe with COVID. So it's hiring a taxi or an Uber that has the plastic that would be willing to transport them, because we wouldn't ask a volunteer to put themselves at risk, because these individuals could have just flown in from South America, or they just came up from Florida. Again, we have no idea the situation with their health status. So there's a lot of logistics. Um, we, we try to let them know that unfortunately, Plattsburgh Cares, certainly we do care, but we just don't have the capacity to have people here long term. Again, no shelters, no way to support people long term in a motel or hotel. And, these cases, there, like I mentioned, many of the challenges, but the successes this past year and a half has been in partnerships. And on our side, we mentioned JCO is Joint Council on Economic Opportunity. They do a lot of things, including our early Head Start and, elderly care. They do a ton of things, but they also are able to help with some of these cases, because almost all of these travelers, although they're referred to DSS, Department of Social Services, because social services, if you will, is state run with federal funds, unless someone has a green card, has already claimed asylum, and has an A number, um, they're not eligible for social services, and that's why JCO can help out a little, and Plattsburgh Cares, just with private donations, can help out a little. um, we have connected with Bridges Not Borders, Saratoga Immigration Coalition, and now folks from all over, from Maine to British Columbia. We have lots of uh, connections. And we've also made good use of our food shelf and food pantries getting emergency food. Um, so that's some of the successes. And I'll just share a few pictures. um, I'm going to start with the picture on the right. You can't make her out, but the woman wearing a skirt is our part-time local immigration attorney, Lauren Parnes. And Lauren will occasionally be called by ICE to say, hey, somebody's getting bonded out. Or a family member will let Lauren know, my loved one is at the Clinton County Jail. And this is a case where this woman was able to get bonded out, and Lauren and an Uber driver and myself were there. And literally, the Uber driver and I had to go to Target and get her clothes. She had broken sandals. She had no clothes whatsoever. So we were able to get her some food for the trip, some change of clothing, and get her on her way down to New York City to meet family. And Lauren likes a picture taken out for the family that the person actually got out of jail. This was a recent individual on the other side, from a Middle Eastern country, that firmly believed that she could be able to cross into Canada. She was a victim of domestic violence. She flew into New York City. She talked to a few attorneys. She was hoping to claim asylum, perhaps in the US, and every one of them said, domestic violence cases in the US is such a high bar, none of them would even take her case. It's not going to work out. Even though, she has credible fear of her husband, the whole family, the community that has shunned her and threatened to hurt her. Um, and in the end, she found a website, Arrive Can, and believe she put in all the information honestly and said she'd be accepted, and she'd got a taxi up to the border, and sure enough, they had all her information there, but she misunderstood that this was like a COVID screening, not an entry into Canada for public health was this ArriveCan website. In the end, she decided to use her return ticket to go back to her country of origin and to make a plan B to leave again in a safe manner back to the U.S. at some point. And I'll just show a couple other families that we got to know briefly. Again, we find out about these families in many different ways. The family on the left with the two small children, oh my gosh, that was the hospital calling Child Protective Service because the mother had become very upset at the border because she believed that her husband had made it through to Canada and now they were separated. And she was just out of her mind. So they called the ambulance, they transported her to the hospital, leaving the two children at the border. And by the way, the border authorities took great care of the children because when the CPS, Child Protective Service worker, went back up, the children were eating McDonald's, they were happy, they were okay. And we were able to eventually get the family together and get them to a shelter. Um, Language was a huge issue. They were from Angola and spoke Lingala, and that's just different African dialect, and that was a again complicating issue. The family on the right was that same young brother and sister and their parents that were able to get a train to Detroit Freedom House and seek shelter there until the border opens, when they will try to go up and claim asylum in the U.S. This last family is another Colombian family. Recently, we've had several Colombian families come up, and they had three children, and we were able to get them down to the Albany bus station. And believe it or not, we got them a bus ticket all the way to California, 4 days on the bus, so that he could stay with a brother out there until the border opens, when they will try to claim asylum in the US. So that is my quick slides. Wendy, how am I doing?
Perfect. You're good.
And you may have questions.
Yeah.
I probably, since the border closed, have touched. That's what we call it. Touched 150 people. I would, that's an estimate, but that's pretty close estimate.
Well,
Some
thank
is very short. Getting somebody out of jail, out of federal detention, and just getting them on the road to their family.
well, thank you, Diana. That was a lot you covered in a very succinct manner. I appreciate that. Thank you. And let's open it up now. If anybody has any questions or comments,
Yeah.
anything they want to share with Diana. Sheila, go ahead.
Yeah, well, it was amazing to hear everything that you're trying to do with so few resources and such a huge number. I really appreciate hearing about that, Diana. I'm going to be thinking about it and how perhaps we on this side and in Montreal could be of some support. I do have a couple of questions. One is, I understand that some of your members of Plattsburgh Cares are part of the Unitarian congregation in Plattsburgh. And three of us, Margaret, Sherry, and I, are members of the Lakeshore Unitarian Universalist congregation here in Montreal. So maybe that's another reason we can look at how we can work together. I was curious, when you talk about resources, you didn't mention, do you have a place? Is there any kind of no, nothing. This is just all done.
So, Sheila, I'm very excited. No, we haven't had a place. And this is very exciting. We have a Catholic church in Plattsburgh that closed 8 or 9 years ago. It is emerging as an outreach center for the stayers, where we're going to do GED classes, English as a second language, because we haven't had that. We've
Wow.
had a little area for English as a second language, and that's where some of our folks have gone that are stayers. But the beauty is there's a parsonage, a 3-bedroom house attached, and we're renovating that. As a matter of fact, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, I'm going to be there helping the demolition team take out the kitchen. We're renovating this house so it can be used for what the town of Plattsburgh is calling transitional
Wow.
housing up to 72 hours,
Wow.
which is so beautiful because we're thinking of these people that need a short-term stay immediately. You know, some of our churches said, yeah, we can help, but we need a 24-hour notice. We can only, and it just doesn't work that way. You need something immediate. So we're very excited. We hope to have the house open by the end of the summer, by the end of August.
Oh,
And that will
fantastic.
help because in 2020, just Plattsburgh Cares spent $12,000 on transportation, hotels, and food. JCO spent 6,000. So
Mm.
that's, in 2020. And and Plattsburgh Cares took in donations in 2020, like 5,000 and some. But luckily, we had money in the bank because up to that point, up to the border closure, people got through. We
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
we didn't have
Enough
this.
problem.
Yes, and we know these people are on our doorstep. They're cold, they're hungry, they are at a loss. They need some time to get their feet under them. Some of them are exhausted. They've spent all night, in the lobby of the customs house. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that is great news. And just to say, I don't know whether Jim is hearing this, but I know that the Catholic, whatever it's called, diocese in Montreal prepared a place like that in Montreal back a couple of years ago. And I'll make sure that maybe some links can be made about how they did with I forget what they called it, but it was in sort of downtown or East End Montreal. And they might have some guidance just from their own experience of how a wonderful resource like that can be managed. I'm going to have to zip out in a few minutes, but I'll find out from all the others, but I'm due at another annual meeting. But thank you. I really
Thank you,
appreciate
Sheila.
hearing from you. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Sheila.
Curious, just if have things changed in the U.S. Since your administration changed? Because it's sort of, I got the impression, and I could be totally wrong, that a lot of people were fleeing to Canada because the U.S. is so anti-immigrant and so focused on jailing people or shipping them back wherever they came from, no matter what circumstances they came from. And honestly, I cannot in my wildest imagination believe that anyone would traverse halfway around the world unless they had a damn good reason to. I don't think they're doing it just to sightsee. They're fleeing from something terrible, whether it be economic, violence, whatever. They're fleeing something.
Absolutely, Margaret. They are fleeing, even though they may come on a tourist visa, because it's easier to get a tourist visa to the US than to Canada.
Yeah.
But as far as our new administration, there's hope, but not much has changed. The safe third country is still in valid agreement that has to be respected. And we don't know what the future will bring. We're hoping that there's some relief for folks, but it's hard to tell going forward. Obviously this administration is much more sensitive to immigrant issues. But they're so backlogged, and the southern border is such an urgent, horrific matter. Not as much attention is being paid to us at the northern border with the few hundred or few thousand we get compared to the tens of thousands of folks trying to get into US from Mexico.
Well, you might when Roxham Road opens again, you might want to add to your English as a second language courses. You might want to add French as a second language courses.
Absolutely. And I'm very curious about that because right now we know the border is closed because of COVID. Has nothing to do with President Biden.
Yeah.
It's the COVID. And that's, both your prime minister and, it's not about them, it's about COVID. So I'm curious what will happen when the border eventually reopens. Is it going to be phased? And what is Roxham Road going to look like? I don't know. I'm very curious about how that's going to, because I know on the Canadian side, there's push pull about, closing it and leaving it open because that's the only way that people can get in once they're in the US because they're required to claim asylum in the first safe country they come to. And the only way is to come through an unofficial or irregular crossing and hope to get um, that pre-removal risk assessment if they've already claimed asylum in the US and now they want to try to get into Canada. So I'm curious. I'm all ears. Yeah.
Sinclair?
This must sound a bit naive, but it follows on with Margaret's question, I think, about Roxham Road. Is the border well policed? Are any people trying to sneak through or climb through the bushes, or what happens?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
No.
Oh, absolutely. So since the border closed, we've had lots of people, not as many as before, but yes, so many of the people we see try to cross at Roxham. And what happens, the RCMP is there and they bring them over to Lacole for processing. And then because of COVID, the traveler is returned to the US side, and usually the box that's checked is because of the COVID restrictions, and that they can come back when the border opens, and their paperwork will say, May or June 21st, or when border opens. So again, people think, oh, it might open June 21st, but we all know month after month they've extended it those 30 days.
Francis had a question also.
Yeah. Thanks, Diana. That was so interesting. I didn't even think about the farm worker situation on the other side of the border. So that's a huge piece of work that you do that I wasn't aware of. And it just struck me listening to you of the challenge of getting the proper information to people to know about if they can possibly cross, and how difficult that's been. So yeah, I mean, that I know the cross-border group is work also, but that's just such a big issue to look at. It leaves me wondering, as you were talking, I suddenly had this image of once the border opens that we might start seeing, I think we'll see a huge rush of people coming over who have been sitting in the States waiting. And so that's an interesting one for us to think about on this side, because we've kind of been sitting in limbo up until now. And I guess the question I have for you is, are you all volunteers at Plattsburgh Cares?
Yes, we have no staff. Yeah, we have no place, no staff. So we're very small. We're very small. But I do have to let you know that Kim LaRoe, who some of you met, started from scratch with a 2-year grant from the Office of New Americans, as a community immigrant navigator. They did not continue that particular grant, but ONA has just started something like an immigrant resource coordinator. So it's a 1-year grant that can be reapplied for. And we have a woman that just got hired a month ago who lives in Hemingford, and she commutes every day to her office, which is housed in JCEO on Margaret Street, right in the city of Plattsburgh. So I'm getting to know Diane Noiser, who lives in Hemingford and crosses every day, and I'm hoping she gets connected with you all too. But this is a new field for her, and so we're trying to meet weekly for to kind of go over various cases and protocols with her, because Office of New Americans based in Albany or New York City really, they I think are becoming aware of the unique situation that we have in the North Country, because all these other immigrant community navigators, it's in big cities, Syracuse and Buffalo and Rochester, but with our area, there's no infrastructure. I mean, the immigrant resource coordinator, we don't have resources. We're trying to develop them. Yes.
Thanks, Diana. Does anybody
And
else have?
we do have,
Sorry, go on.
just we do have those links with Diane now.
Yeah, with Jian, yeah.
Yeah.
So does anybody else want to ask Diana a question or make a comment or chip in?
Yeah, Diana, I was wondering, do you have a sense, you said you promised numbers, and we saw numbers from 2017 to 2019. And you mentioned you've come across about 150 people since the border closed. Are there any more specific numbers of people who, I mean, are you aware of any sources for knowing, what happens to people who get sent back to the US? How many people come through? Do you have a sense of any of that?
So it's so interesting, Grace, because the US doesn't have those numbers to give to us or to anyone. The only reason we have them is because of the Canadian system that keeps track. And I think, is the running total up to like 258 people, Wendy?
Well, I was going to mention this later, but basically, since the border closed in March 2020 up until the end of April 2021, 415 people have crossed irregularly into the whole of Canada. And the Canadian Border Services Agency stated that they have sent back to the United States 387 people out of that 415. So
and most of them, that cross irregularly is still at Roxham Road.
Yes, that's right. The great majority is still at Roxham, yeah. But that, of course, doesn't cover the people who get to the border and then don't cross because they realize that they'll just be sent back to the United States. So there's a whole other group of people that, of course, can't be included in those figures from the Government of Canada.
Right. And just one quick example. We find out about these cases in many ways, but we have a taxi driver that's an ally. He's wonderful. His name is Abdul. and he's incredible. And you may have already met him.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I think
Yes.
all of us who used to go to the border met him. Yeah.
Right. So this is 2 weeks ago, probably, and Abdul called me from the airport because this particular Colombian family had just flown in and wanted to be taken to Roxham Road. And he tried his best to tell them the border's closed. Well, he always asked, "Do you have family?" Because we all know if you meet, a third country exception, you can get in, but no family. So, he called me. And I got Luis, my Sierra, who did the translation for the newest press release. We did a three-way conversation, and we did our best to say, this is what's going to happen if you cross. And the family still wanted to go. And you know, I Abdul was like, he wouldn't bring them up. And you know what he did? He took this step to contact the father that was on that 4-day bus trip out to California, that did cross and had to spend hours at Lacole and then got turned around. He called that father to talk to this father to say, look, this is what's going to happen, and finally prevailed on this family not to cross.
Wow.
Wow. I
He's,
know.
he's, he's one of the angels of Roxham Road.
He is. He won't
Yeah.
go, but we're aware that some unscrupulous taxi drivers um, still are making trips to Roxham Road and still overcharging. We have heard of a case where a woman charged $700 to go from Spoon Lake to the border. So, when we hear about those things, Janet McFedridge will often call. She has a contact in the New York AG's office. We try to let them know because this is, again, taking advantage, price gouging. Yeah, but I cannot thank you enough for all you do, because especially trying to help people integrate into the community, settle them, befriend them, make sure they have the basics, cookware and sheets and, the basic stuff for a household or an apartment. There's so much involved with trying to support new folks in the community, and we never know how their case is going to resolve. And that's one of the hardships we were talking about earlier. As helpers, we just have to say, look, we do our part. I know these people have so many issues and problems, and I can only help a little. My goal is to get them to their next destination safely on their long journey, because we don't have the resources to help them with everything here. So good work, all.